I want to welcome you to our first Free Market Speaker Series of the fall semester. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Dr. Peter Calcano. I'm a professor of economics here at the College of Charleston, the director for the Center for Public Choice and Market Process. The mission of the Center for Public Choice and Market Process is to advance the economic, political, and moral foundations of a free society. Our programming then tries to encourage conversation, debate, and values discussion over the history and current events related to how a free society operates. We do this in sort of three areas. We have faculty, who we provide research fellowships to and mentor our students. We have outreach to both the campus community and the larger Charleston community with our Free Market Speaker Series and our Adam Smith Week events. And at the center of all of our work is our student operations, our economics book colloquiums, our regional reading groups, and our mentoring programs with the Market Process Scholars and the Public Choice Associates. If you're interested in learning more about the center, we are on every social media outlet, right? So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, you can find us, follow what we're doing. There is information about the center at the table. For the students here, right, you should see that there are little table tents with QR codes on there. You can click on those QR codes. It'll take you to a survey that'll help us to provide feedback about the event. And if you were so inspired to have been given extra credit, right, we will also then know that you were here. At this point then, I want to bring up one of our market process scholars, Corey Holcomb, who will introduce our speaker for this evening.
I'm not doing nothing. Hello everybody, my name is Corey Holcomb. I am a market process scholar, and I am up here to introduce our speaker tonight, as well as welcome you all to the first Free Market Speaker Series of the year. I want to go ahead and give a little bit of background on Dr. Anthony Gill. So he has an educational background in political science and history, which he got his undergraduate degree from UCLA. He also decided to go back and get his master's and PhD in political science from UCLA as well. Professionally, he is a professor of political science at the University of Washington, which he's been there since 1994. Additionally, he has experience with Wells Fargo and Marty's Pizza. Outside of academia, he has affiliated experiences with different societies and scholars programs, such as Senior Scholar at the Baylor Institute for Studies of Religion. He's on the standing committee for the American Institute for Economic Research. He's faculty fellow for the Public Choice and Public Policy Project. And then he is a member of the Public Choice Society, Heterodox Academy, Philadelphia Society, Association for Private Enterprise Education as well. And outside of all these professional and academic involvements, he has also got quite a few interesting facts. One of which he is a certified scuba diver. He is a Taekwondo black belt. And in 2006, he was Time Magazine's Person of the Year. So please welcome Dr. Anthony Gill.
All right, thank you very much for being here. It's going to be a little bit interesting talk because this is an econ business school, and normally you're used to econ professors. I'm a trained political scientist, but I am going to give you some economics from the political science side of things. I tend to consider myself more of an economic sociologist today. So what I want to talk to you, and this is going to be important for you for the rest of the year, because as I understand it, Dr. C has a number of other guests that are coming to talk on similar topics. So this one hopefully will frame what you're going to hear over the next several months. And also, not only in the speaker series here, but in the rest of your classes, because I want you to take this general framework and think about it and how it applies to the rest of your classes. All right, so we're going to talk about the economic importance of civil society, norms, and governance. And to start us all off, I want to talk to you in general about political economy. I'm a political economist, trained as a political economist. And this is how it typically goes. It typically goes this way in classrooms, typically goes this way in academic research as well. We start with markets and individuals. Okay, so that's the economic side of things. So if you're in an economics class or a political economy class, we generally in the first day, first weeks or so, talk about economics from the side of the individual. And we make certain assumptions about these individuals. First of all, we make assumptions that those individuals are rational. They're rational actors in that they calculate their cost-benefit analysis, and they always end up choosing the most optimal choice, or choose to maximize their expected utility, playing a little bit of odds, knowing what could be a number of different future outcomes. So we're dealing with rational actors. You're all calculators. You're all really good cost-benefit analysis calculators. The other assumption that we make is that individuals are self-interested. That they're basically, doesn't mean they're selfish and are going to take a lot of things, but when it comes down to making decisions, they're going to make decisions about themselves first and their utility. Very simple assumptions here, and that's usually how we start out with this. Those assumptions aren't really interrogated very much, they kind of brush through those very quickly, but then what happens next in the political economy world is they say, okay, well, markets occur because self-interested individuals get connected with one another, they can make trade relationships, there's comparative advantage, all really wonderful, but there are several problems here that arise for society in general. The first one of these are public goods. We need certain things in society that can only be provided through cooperative effort, but the problem with rational, self-interested individuals is that they don't want to cooperate. They want a free ride. They want everybody else to do the work, pay the cost, and them to receive the benefit. And in a public goods world, if the benefit cannot be excluded from them, they're not going to want to pay the cost. So public goods are going to be underprovided. And public goods range from a lot of different things like national defense, maybe you can talk about roads or schools. Some of these I don't really consider full public goods, but a general system of law as well, of law and order. That's a very important thing that we talk about in public goods. And again, that won't be provided, it is said by political economists, by rational, self-interested individuals. We're going to have to deal with that problem. The other problem is, we talked about this in Dr. C's class a little bit earlier yesterday, for some of you who were in that class, externalities, specifically negative externalities. The public good is a positive externality, but when we talk about externalities, we're usually talking about negative externalities, is that when two individuals engage in some kind of interaction that are beneficial to both of them, they oftentimes produce costs on other individuals who are not involved in the interaction. Okay? They create pollution, is another way of thinking of a negative externality. And again, rational, self-interested economic actors are not really concerned about what happens with the externalities because they're worried about them, they're self-interested, and they're rational. If I'm not paying the cost, I don't have to worry about the cost. But again, for society, that becomes problematic because we don't want to have a lot of externalities. We don't want other people paying the cost, and sometimes we have to pay that as well. So we have to do something about this. Do something. I said, if there's anything about the political science majors, I mean, political science majors are always like, let's do something then. Well, what do? We generally turn to public policy. And this is where us political scientists shine. It's government. We turn to politics, right? If we can't solve these externality problems, if we're imposing costs on other individuals, and we can't generate public goods in the quantity that we need them for a successful, efficient society, we have to turn to government. That's right, it's talked about government. I'll talk about governance in a second, but I'm going to emphasize the ment there at the background. And what we do here, we can say markets fail. Markets generally do a lot of things, but sometimes they fail. So we need government to create public policy, which means that they're going to create laws, regulations, ordinances, et cetera, et cetera. Laws that deal with these things, that provide the things that individuals in a market cannot provide, those public goods, that mitigate those negative externalities. And you can't do this because that's going to cause some harm to some other individual. So we create laws that regulate all this. Well, the laws and the government itself is going to need resources to monitor and enforce all these laws. So they need to take taxes. And a lot of times these taxes go directly to the provision of public goods. We're going to tax you some money, take some of your resources so that we can pay a Navy or an Air Force to defend our borders, to build roads, to build schools or other things that we might consider to be necessary and unlikely to be provided by the private sector in markets. And then finally, we need policing. And those police are going to have to be paid. Okay, it's not just the police that you think of that pull you over when you're speeding. It's the policing of the different bureaucracies that are making sure that these laws are adhered to and that you're paying your taxes, so the IRS works into there and all these other things. So that is what political economy does. Markets, individuals, rational, self-interested calculators can't do that very well with certain things. We turn immediately to government. And in the class yesterday too, a few people, when we were talking about externalities, said, well, we'll get the government to deal with it. Notice how quickly we turn to government, especially election season. We want the government to do all this kind of stuff. There's a few other things that mainstream economics has turned to as well in terms of limitations to the basic model of rational self-interested actors, and that's this field known as behavioral economics. It brings psychology into the mix and says, human beings aren't really all that perfect of a calculator. I know that because I'm not. We have our certain biases. We have certain ways that we look at the world. We're not good calculators. We don't estimate risks appropriately to make good expected utility calculations here. And so what we need is somebody to nudge us to make the right choice. A very good example of this for me is that in the long term, I want to live a long, healthy life, right? That's my big goal, but I drive past Dairy Queen on the way home every day. Right? And in the short term, I want Dairy Queen more than the long term. So I need somebody to nudge me to say, listen, you're too myopic. You can't think for yourself. Yes, you're rational, self-interested, but you're limited in your rationality. If you really want to live a long life, you got to stay away from Dairy Queen. So we get people to nudge. And the reason I have elephants up here is there's a famous book by Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler. Thaler's a Nobel economist for his work on behavioral economics. And they have a thing called Nudge. A book called Nudge. And it's basically what we have to do is just figure out what these biases are that people have, and then we kind of use government to nudge them to make the right choice. It doesn't sound as bad as laws. We're not going to force anybody. We're just going to nudge people. I always find it instructive that they use the symbol of an elephant on their book. Mom elephant is just nudging the baby elephant, because they oftentimes forget that elephants actually trample crops, right, and villages. So that's kind of a weird thing that they do. But they say, yeah, human beings are limited. So, we're kind of moving away from this kind of stuff. Okay. But there are some problems with that model as well. And again, this is where I debate with my colleagues all the time. They say, well, you're market-oriented political economists. You think markets work for everything and all that kind of stuff, right? But markets don't work all the time, so we need government. But government doesn't work all the time either. You know why? Well, first of all, our models kind of get things a little bit wrong here. On the side of the market economics, human beings are not thin utility maximizer. What I mean by thin utility maximizer is the typical economic model, and I mean, many of you kind of have this version in your head, is that we're all just about money and getting as much as we can in self-interest and things like this, right? But human beings are a little bit more complicated by that. We're not just interested in maximizing our income or one specific thing. We actually maximize a bunch of stuff. We're thicker than the thin utility models that a lot of economists posit upon us. We maximize income. I want to get a higher income, but I also want status. I want to improve my reputation. Part of my utility function is not just me. I'm not just purely self-interested. I care about my kids. I care about my wife. I care about my family. I care about some other people that I know too. So those people enter into my utility function, so I'm not fully self-interested. And that's kind of cool. It makes us thicker individuals. So we're maximizing a lot of different things. A lot of these different things, and it's hard to keep into the very simple economic model, so we always tend to defer to the thin utility maximization models that think people are just out there to get money in for themselves. And that kind of gives economists a bad name. I'm going to try to erase that bad name today with some other observations as we go along here. On the government side of things, government's not perfect. Because government, especially when you think about the behavioral economists saying, oh, well, people are not really good calculators, so we need government to make good calculations for them and nudge them in certain directions. Wait a minute. Who are those people? Do they have the same kind of biases that other human beings do? In a rational actor sense, are those government individuals self-interested, right, out for themselves? And politicians will tell you that they're not. It's campaign season. It's like, I'm here to be a public servant and I'm going to do good. No, you're there to get reelected, and that's the number one thing that's going to benefit you. But on top of that, you're also limited cognitively, like everybody else is. So you get, the behavioral economists have to deal with the fact that they see a bunch of people with biases and they want to correct that, but they have those biases as well too. There's an issue of behavioral symmetry. We can't posit on top of government, some kind of virtuous, angelic individuals who are going to solve everything for us because they're so public-spirited and all those rational, self-interested actors in the market are not. No, politicians are just as self-interested and just as limited cognitively as everybody else. You have to understand. Big thing in public choice. Professor Calcano was talking about the Public Choice Society and the things that we do with that. Public choice is all about that. The biggest assumption is government officials are just like everybody else. So don't assume that they're going to be more public-spirited than other individuals. They might be, because again, we're thickly human individuals here. And the other problem is, how do we make decisions for very large groups of individuals when we don't know what everybody wants? This is the knowledge problem, right? So government wants to provide for the common good. Well, what is the common good? How do we know that? We have to aggregate everybody's preferences and kind of figure it out really well, and then make a decision based on that. The problem is we all have diverse preferences. More importantly, not only do we have diverse preferences, but our preferences are changing all the time. So how do you even figure this out? You can have the smartest person from MIT try to figure out what is the optimal minimum wage to have. But market conditions and individuals and all their preferences are changing all the time. How can you do that? The knowledge out there is just so dispersed. To concentrate it within, one expert commission or one set of politicians or even elections is very difficult. So, well, we'll just ask everybody through elections what they all want. We'll just kind of aggregate that, and that'll be really good. Well, the problem is that's very costly, because if you did that for every decision that government made, all you would be doing is voting all the time. And on top of it, as a political scientist, voting has its big limitations, in that we oftentimes are voting on things or asked to vote about things that we don't even care about. So we're very sloppy in making our decisions. In Washington State, there was a statewide referendum that asked if we wanted to raise the minimum wage to $17 an hour. And so a lot of people in Seattle were like, yeah, it's really expensive to live in Seattle, but not in Moses Lake on the other side of the state. But I was voting for people on Moses Lake, and Moses Lake was too expensive for businesses to actually deal with that higher interest rate. So who cares? It doesn't matter to me. So there's some problems here with government, even democratic government. Democratic failure is basically individuals making choices, collective action choices for individuals with very limited information on things and little care about what goes into it. But it's the third thing that I think is the most important problem with these both models, is that they miss something in between economics and politics. Something that is oftentimes overlooked and should not be overlooked, and that is civil society. We neglect civil society. It's this thing that's in the middle. I made it puffy clouds because I like to think about it as the double stuff in the Oreo cookie. And you got the two cookies on one side, but then you got all that really kind of creamy goodness in the middle, right? That's civil society. Civil society does a lot of these things that you think government should be doing, but it oftentimes goes unnoticed by social scientists, political economists, because it's very difficult to see and difficult to measure. So let's define what this civil society thing is. Civil society is this organizational zone in between our atomistic human actors in the marketplace, those supposedly rational, supposedly self-interested individuals who are making cost-benefit calculations about their own interests, and in between government, which, by the way, is coercive. And my political science students hate to hear that, because they're like,
well, the market is really mean because it exploits everybody, so you gotta do something that has the government.
I go, the government's based on coercion, right?
Oh, it's not, the government's.
Can I disobey laws?
Well, if they're made democratically, I guess that's okay, because we all agree.
I didn't agree to that law. And if I disobey that law, I'm going to be fined, thrown in prison, or worse. At the end of the day, government policy, government decisions are based on coercion. Market interactions are based on volunteerism. The stuff in the middle, though, brings collective action into the mix, goes beyond these atomistic individuals here, and allows us to cooperate voluntarily and do a lot of the things that government does, but without all the coercion. And that's pretty cool, right? I find that to be pretty good. We provide public goods, and we mitigate externalities within civil society. Now, when we think about this, and especially when you go to conferences and people are presenting papers on civil society, the first thing they think about are organizations and groups. Churches, by the way, are one of them. I spent most of my career studying religion and politics from an economic framework. So this is how I got to this point. Because I'm like, wow, religious organizations, churches, temples and synagogues and mosques and all those kind of different congregations are actually doing a lot of this stuff that government does. We're working on a paper now called Religion as Governance. Right? It's one of the most fundamental forms of human governance that predates government or the state. It does a lot of that stuff. But there's other groups. There's clubs, too. There's the YMCA. There's United Way. There's Sierra Clubs. There's fraternities and sororities. There's the Moose Lodge and all that stuff. There's even things like the National Rifle Association that provide a bunch of public goods for individuals and also help to ease conflict that come about possibly through different types of externalities that are imposed on other individuals. We're taught about that all the time in churches. Different clubs try to ease tension between individuals by negotiating different types of conflict that might come up during this period of time, solve resource problems as well. So that's what we normally think about when we think about civil society. And most scholars like to do that because it's measurable. You can see these things. They set up organizations and they file with the government their 501c3 forms. And you can count their members and they have buildings where you can kind of see. But there's another aspect of civil society that I think is as important, if not more so. And that's this, what I like to call culture clubs. A little play on the 1980s band. And it's just groups of individuals that share the same values, norms, and rituals. Right? They get together and they kind of create their own rules on themselves. That's what culture is. Culture is basically, a knowledge base along with a set of norms, which are rules of thumb. This is how we're, normally behave. A set of values. We're all going to agree that these things are going to be important. And then rituals that kind of reinforce that stuff. And this occurs all over the place. Right? We can talk about big cultures, like the Southern culture down here is very different than my Pacific Northwest culture. But it also happens on small scales. You have friends that you kind of hang out with, and you have rules of thumb. You play pickup basketball or something. You got your own kind of rules that you develop on your own, and you monitor them and you police them, right? You're kind of acting to govern the behavior amongst other individuals. And so all these things, these clubs, these groups, these informal groups that come and go all the time, they're always in constant flux. They support similar values. They create norms of behavior. And they do exercise things through rituals. Rituals like gifting, by the way. And I'll tell you in a few minutes how gifting is a really critical, essential ritual within civil society. But that's what civil society is here. Right? Now, I want to take a jab a little bit at your Econ 101 class and talk about the basic social problem, because this sets up the fundamental importance of civil society. So if you take an Econ 101 course, one of the things that they like to do oftentimes is start out with the Robinson Crusoe scenario. There you are on a deserted island. Are you doing economics? Well, yes, you are. You're making cost-benefit calculations about how to use your time, with marginal costs and benefits, how much more do I put into gathering food versus building a hut or something like this, right? But you're not engaged in any trade because it's just you. There's no society here. There's no society here. So it's just kind of simple, rational actor calculations. Very simple. It starts with that. But then what they do in that scenario is they introduce somebody else. All of a sudden, somebody else appears on the beach. Now, here's what happens in Econ 101. Person thought they were alone on the beach or alone on this deserted island. All of a sudden, somebody else is there. So what do? Oh my gosh, what a great opportunity to teach about comparative advantage. Okay? And many of you have probably seen this, right? Once you get two people, we can specialize and we can divide up. And you can see this person. He was a stranded economist. And he says, hi, I'm an economist. Let's specialize and leverage comparative advantage I have graphed out here. That's the first thing that person says when they see another person on the island, right? You go to, they got the charts, here's the charts, it's like, bikes and, cars, and we specialize and look at this, and, all that kind of thing, it's really exciting. That never happens. You know what happens? What's the first thing that happens when another person appears on an island where you thought you were the only one? That person says, who the hell is that person? Are they gonna kill me? Right? They're talking about all these graphs and stuff. Can I trust this person to engage in some kind of interaction and some kind of trade in terms of that? Well, that sounds kind of wacky here, right? And why the hell are we building cars and bicycles on a deserted island? Right? What they have to do, first of all, is decide a very basic thing. Are we going to interact with one another? Are we going to have a relationship? And if we have a relationship, what is that relationship going to look like? And again, if they don't know each other, they're perfect strangers, what do you do? How do you do that? You're just staring at somebody, right? And I want you to think about this, because it seems real fundamental, seems really weird, but it's important. Because you look at that person and say, how do I get that person to trust me and interact with me? Well, one of the most common ways of doing this is actually to give a gift or to make some kind of sacrifice. So the economist should actually do this. Listen, I've been gathering coconuts and fruits and stuff all day. I'm going to give you some of that kind of stuff. Here, you take some of this stuff. This is food. It's important to me, but I'm giving this to you to show that you can trust me. And the other person says, oh, they just gave up some of their resources. Okay, you must be a pretty okay person. And they kind of look at that and say, well, thank you very much for that. I'll reciprocate. I'll help you do something else. I'll help work on a hut. I'm really good at, bundling straw and making bamboo walls or whatever it might be. You need to build that relationship first. And there's an economist, used to be at Harvard, he's at Brown University now, Glenn Loury, has this really nice statement, relations before transactions. And that's really what this whole civil society idea is about. Before you engage in any of these transactions, all the stuff you learn in your economics class, before you do that, you have to have a relationship with that other individual. You have to make that critical decision, am I going to interact with them? Because there will be no trade if you say, don't trust that person, not going to interact with them. And I just don't want to, there'll be no society. It's possible that these two individuals say, no, you're too scary, and they go on separate sides of the islands, they might as well just be there on their own. No markets, no society. There's two individuals living never in contact with them. But they have to basically decide. And human relations are formed within civil society. That's what that squishy middle part is all about. Is deciding whether or not we trust other individuals and whether or not we're going to interact with them. And if we do interact with them, what are going to be the basic ground rules of interaction? Again, there's no government here to do that. They have to do that on their own. Okay? And how are we going to trust you? How many hours you can work, how many hours I have to work, how are we going to arrange the trade and all that kind of stuff? They're going to have to negotiate themselves without any kind of government. So this gets us into the world of something called humanomics. And I say that humanomics is a new world, and it's also a new word. Okay? And you can see I kind of play the fonting a little bit here too, because it's a new word, humanomics, and I hope this catches on because I think it's quite a brilliant idea. But the idea is as old as Adam Smith, actually, right? Two scholars, Vernon Smith, a Nobel laureate, and Bart Wilson, have written a book called Humanomics, and what they want to do is take the two sides of Adam Smith, the wealth of nations, which is usually kind of the foundation, the cornerstone of all modern economics, and that's where you can kind of find the rational individual calculator. It's not spelled out explicitly like it is today, but that's the market-oriented, self-interested, rational actor kind of aspect of Smith. It's a little bit fuller than that, more full than that. But then there's another Smith. There's this whole theory of moral sentiments. And Smith was interested in how do individuals get along with one another by creating a code of ethics or moral behavior that says, how do we get along with one another? If I'm in a situation, he has this whole thing about this impartial spectator. He sees two individuals that are interacting. He says, well, what should each of them do? Or if I'm in a situation, what should I do? I should step back and think about me being an impartial spectator, and how would that impartial spectator view different scenarios here? I should choose the one that probably is the best. And that's how he believes that morals kind of form. And a lot of this is about civil society forming, especially that more informal aspect of civil society, which is really kind of neat, I think. If you ever get your hands on Humanomics, I urge you to read it. It's much more readable than the Theory of Moral Sentiments. But you should read that one as well, too. Okay? So I want to talk to you about this in the framework of Humanomics here. Where can we find Humanomics in action? And I want to tell you that you participate and are influenced by all these kind of informal norms, these values that kind of come about, in ways that you might not even know. So I asked you to play a little game here before you came in. I called it the Divide the Dollars game. The actual term in game theory is called the ultimatum game. But that sounds really ultimatum-y-ish. Divide the Dollars is much more descriptive. And here's how the game is played. You get two anonymous individuals. They don't know who each other are. They're never going to see each other before any decisions are made. And after this game, they're probably never going to see each other again. They're not going to know who each other are. And what they're doing is they're given a task. $100 is put before them, 100 $1 bills. And one player, one person is tasked with this. I want you to divide up these 100 $1 bills between you and another person. Okay? So player one divides those $100 up. Player two then is given that offer, and again, they remain anonymous, so they take it into another room or a secret room, a sealed envelope, all this kind of stuff, right? Makes it anonymous. Player number two then decides, do I accept that offer, or do I reject that offer? And the rules go as such. If player number two accepts the offer, both player one and player two leave the game with the money according to how player one decided it would be divided. So if player one says, I want to keep $90, I'll give $10 to player number two, and player number two says, yay, verily, I like that. Player number one leaves with $90, player number two leaves with $10. Okay? However, if player number two says, no, I reject that offer. I do not want this offer. Both players leave with zero. Money is collected again, neither of them see it again. Some of you wrote this down. What did you put down? Who? I'll pick somebody. Right here. Did you play the game?
I didn't write anything down, but I was just thinking like 50-50.
50-50. Anybody else say 50-50? Okay, that's kind of cool. Anybody else say 75-25, 75? Anything like that? How about somebody who didn't raise their hand? What'd you say? Want to volunteer? Answer? Yes.
I offered 99.
You offered 99 and the other person $1. Why'd you do that?
No. I offered them 99. I was going to keep the $1.
See, you got 101? You're supposed to be a rational, self-interested actor.
What
What a charitable deal, man. Oh my gosh. You're marriage material, I guess. Okay. You're a giver. You're a giver, right? Okay. Here's the thing about this game. The rational, self-interested, thin utility answer is this. Player number one should keep $99, not $1.99, and give the other person $1. And player number two should say, if they're a thin, rational actor, interested in maximizing their utility, the decision that they get with that offer is, do you want $1 or do you want $0? Because that's in their hand right now. That's all they can say, is I accept the offer, you get $1. I reject the offer, you get $0. Is $1 better than $0? Yes. And when I play this in my classes, usually I do it on the second or third day of lecture, but on the first day of lecture, I go around to some individuals in the room, and I say, do you want a $1 bill? They said, yeah. Well, what's the cash? I said, no cash. You want a $1 bill? Well, no, I'll take a $1 bill. I give them a $1 bill. Nobody ever turns it down. Well, what happens in this game? Right? And again, player number one should say, wait a minute, if they're a thin utility maximizing actor, and I give them $1, they should accept the $1, so I can keep $99, and I'm basically benefiting myself. I'm maximizing my take. You don't want to do 100 and 0, because the other person, player number two, has to decide between 0 or 0. So they could just flip a coin. So your expected utility is, on average, you just get $50. But in a single play game, you either get 100 or 0. But you're gonna see something else that really kind of conditions all this stuff. What really happens, because this rarely ever happens, the 99-1 split. This is how it was, this is how it turned out in my class of about 160 students last fall, so about a year from now. I divided all the answers into different categories. The greedy answer is that player number 1 keeps 100 and offers the other person 0. That did nothing. Occasionally, I've been playing this game for 30 years. Occasionally, somebody will do the greedy spots. 100 and I'm giving the other person 0. And so the purple here is for the number of people that offer that, and the gold here is for the people that accept it. 0, 0, greedy, nobody did that, okay? The rational response, we had 8 people out of 160 do the 99-1 split. Maybe they heard it talked about in another class, or maybe they thought through this and said, yeah, I want 99. Who the hell would turn down $1 bill? In fact, I saw Professor Gill giving people $1 bills, and nobody turned down $1 bill. Well, guess what? When 8 people offered that, 5 people rejected it. Only 3 people took the $1 bill. More often than not, people reject the 99-1 split, even though a thin, rational utility maximizer would take the $1 because $1 is better than $0. If that's all you care about. If you're thin, not thick. Okay? Egalitarian response here is 50-50. How many people did 50-50 again? Yeah, a fair number of people did. Why'd you do 50-50? This answer's important. Who did? Yes, why'd you do 50-50?
It's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, well, so is 99-1.
Yeah, but they're less likely to deny it.
Did you know that?
They're getting the same.
You know?
Well, if I was on their side, I would rather get the same and get one.
Did you ever go to kindergarten?
Yes.
Did they teach you share and share alike? Yeah, you've heard the term share and share alike, right?
Yeah.
That's rattling around in the back of your head, I think. Now, there are some people that did the altruistic thing. You're Hunter, right? Yeah, Hunter did this, right? And I've seen a few more of these lately, and I wondered what's really... If I put real money on the table, this tends to evaporate. Okay? But occasionally you get people, and altruistic, everybody takes that. This is the interesting category, the semi-rational part. And this is an offer between 98.2 and 51.49. So anything in between there. And what I have found over the years, this pattern has basically been similar for 30 years. It has not changed. And people who play this ultimatum game, and you do it a little bit more rigorously with experimental design, and all that kind of stuff, they actually find it's very similar to this as well, too. Right? What you see is that most people want to keep more to themselves, but they also give to other people. And what's interesting, I kind of calculate, where you're going to, basically, where's the cut point. It used to be about $25. You needed to offer somebody $25, player number 2, $25, before you can pretty much be assured that they would say yes. Some people rejected 60-40 offers. Some people took 95-5 offers. But on average, if you got up to $25, and this has been creeping up, right here, it's about a third, $33. Roughly in that ballpark. So once you offered somebody a 65-35, chances are they were going to take the 35, but you're taking more and they're taking less. They're willing to take that. What's interesting is it's telling us what's going on here. A couple things. One, it might be that, well, for the 50-50 people, it's like, hey, when you get this kind of bountiful thing from the heavens, manna from heaven, you share and share alike, because that's what my grade school teacher taught me. That's what my grandma taught me, and all my parents taught me. Share with other individuals. You benefited from something really nice. Share that wonderful opportunity with other people. Show them that you're giving. Show them that you're willing to make a sacrifice. You could take 99-1, right? But you're willing to give to a complete, perfect stranger. That's absolutely fascinating, right? But on the other hand, you want to keep a little bit more to yourself. So there is some kind of sense to that rational self-utility message. I want to keep it. But so you're thinking maybe, yeah, share and share alike, but I want a little bit more. I would like to do a 99-1, but I know that other people watch Sesame Street and Barney the Dinosaur, and they learn how to share and all that kind of stuff. They're going to reject the 99-1 because they're going to think, my gosh, that person is really greedy. I'm going to teach them a lesson, right? And I'll teach them a lesson if they only give me $10. And I'll teach them a lesson if they give me 15. What, 35? Maybe that lesson really isn't that important. I'll take that. Right? And so that's kind of what you're thinking there. I'm in a world where people, want to maximize their income in a thin, rational sense. But they also want to maximize maybe their respect, the respect for the rules about sharing and caring. Did you go to kindergarten? Didn't you listen to Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers and all those? Tells you to share and be generous and be a nice person. We're maximizing all that kind of stuff. This is the stuff of civil society. This is where civil societies happen. Because you've been taught over the years to share and share alike, to be generous with your, good fortunes and share it with other individuals. I mean, this is just absolutely fascinating. Interestingly enough, you want to know where they play this game in a number of different societies. It turns out that market-oriented societies tend to be more generous than more communitarian societies. Why? Communitarian societies, they all like share everything, so they should be really good at sharing. Turns out market-oriented societies, when you have to deal with anonymous people and build trust, you need to develop rituals and values about sharing, about sacrifice, and being kind to other individuals. It's really important because markets don't work if everybody is just thinly rational and don't trust one another. You need something else there. That's what civil society is doing here. Right? All right. On top of this, when it comes to other things, a number of experiments are done. They do these games called the prisoner's dilemma. Many of you probably have heard about this. They have two prisoners in a room, they cut them a deal, and basically if both prisoners decide not to say anything, the DA has to let them off and they get off the hook. But they also give them a sweet deal that if they rat on their friend, or they were involved in this crime, they're gonna get a better deal than the other person. So the group would be much better off, this cabal of criminals would be better off if everybody cooperated and didn't say anything, but each person has an individual to rat or tell on the other person, and what happens is they all rat on one another, and the group is worse off than they would have been before. A more common definition of a prisoner's dilemma is a situation where even though it's in the mutual interest of all the people in the group, the society, the club, whatever it might be, to cooperate, it's in the interest of each player to free ride on somebody else. This is what happens with public goods. This is why political economists say, public goods will never be provided. Because you can get all the benefit and free ride. We should all contribute, then the public good will be better funded, it'll be great, but everybody has an interest in free riding, and everybody else knows that everybody else is going to free ride, so why would I not want to be free ride and play the sucker? So I'm not going to contribute at all. And public goods and cooperation should never occur, or should occur very rarely. This was the insight of Mansur Olson in the logic of collective action. Right? And since that point in time, we've been trying to explain cooperation. How can it come about if everybody is a rational, thin utility maximizing individual who's self-interested? Shouldn't happen. But you know what? Cooperation happens all the time. And we found out that when you play these games in an iterative sense, you play them over and over again, people are more willing to cooperate. So when you see the same person over and over and over again, you kind of cooperate. I played the prisoner's dilemma the first time as a professor at the UW. I brought some students up and I accused both of them of cheating in front of the class without telling them. It's a bad idea in retrospect, because administration didn't think that was funny. But I'm going to play the game. I'm going to show them I'm going to cut them deals, right, and stuff like this. Both of them ended up cooperating. And I was like, damn it, you ruined the game because the prisoner's dilemma says that nobody cooperates. Why did you cooperate? And I asked them this. They said, oh, we're sorority sisters. Right? And if I rat out my sister, she's going to short sheet my bed or something tonight, right? Because they're playing the array game. They're constantly seeing each other. And more importantly, there's been experiments that when you get people face to face with one another, just seeing one another, just interacting with one, become more cooperative. Just bringing people together. This was an insight of Elinor Ostrom, who worked on issues of what we call the tragedy of commons, which is kind of a subset of the public goods problem. The tragedy of the commons, we all need to cooperate in order to preserve a resource, a range land, a grazing land, or fish in the ocean, or something like that, from being depleted. So we all have to cooperate, but everyone has the interest in free riding. And what she found out is that, contrary to what the theoretical expectations are, if everybody is a thin, rational actor, people actually end up cooperating, especially in smaller villages. They have all these rules of thumb and their norms and stuff. And she also found out is that when people meet face to face on a regular basis, they become really cooperative. And that's kind of really cool. And that's relations. That's relationships. Relationships before transactions. You have to trust and know the other person before you start interacting with them. But then the problem becomes, well, in big societies where you have all this anonymous trade, how are you going to scale this up? Because it's real easy to do in a small group of friends. But in a society of a few thousand, 100,000, a couple million, worldwide, 1 billion, 8 billion, how do you scale this kind of stuff up? So that becomes a big question. Why does this cooperation occur? This should be the real question, right? Based upon, our rational actor being thin, only caring about their self-interest and, maximizing their single utility, maybe income or something like that. None of this should happen. So what is actually going on? Why is this stuff occurring? Civil society is the key. Relations before transactions. You have to build relations first. In our day-to-day interactions, we start to realize, face-to-face with individuals, that we're better off if we cooperate. We don't behave according to that real simple, calculated model that we have. We just understand, it's like, yeah, I gotta see this person in a few days, so I better be nice to them because I want them to be nice back to me. It's actually the same insight that Adam Smith had in Theory of Moral Sentiments. So what the impartial spectator would say, yeah, that's the kind of the neat thing to do. Very much like the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Basically, that's the best government rule or governing rule you could have, the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that's basically Theory of Moral Sentiments, Adam Smith, impartial spectator. And you start to realize that, yeah, they're human like me. So we should kind of be kind to one another. We're not just atomistic stick figures here. And what this allows for is governance without government. And governance is creating coordinated behavior, cooperative behavior, coordinated behavior, without relying upon a heavy use of coercion, especially coercion from a state, right? A separate entity in charge with the task of making people obey the laws, and if they don't, club them on the head. I teach a class in anarchy at the University of Washington. And the first thing I have to do is explain, no, we're not going to teach you how to make Molotov cocktails and burn down Portland, Oregon. However desirous that may be. This is being recorded. You should not do that. That's bad. Okay? What anarchy is, at least in my definition of it, is its governance without relying upon one single entity tasked with the specific duty of making laws and punishing people that make those laws. People share in the governance of it. They create their own rules. They just kind of like give and take, and different people are kind of involved in this. We create norms, rules of behavior, of how we share our space in the classroom, how you get along in the dorms or in your fraternity or in your sorority, okay? How we just get along, how people behave at certain bars. Different bars have different kind of quote-unquote cultures, different norms of how you behave on things, right? This stuff always kind of just emerges kind of spontaneously, which makes it really beautiful. And that is governance of our lives. It actually is governance of our lives. So we develop these shared values. Okay, what's really important to us? What do we rank over other things? Our social norms and moral codes, and also rituals that reinforce all this kind of stuff. We use these heuristics because we're not good calculators. I don't know how to calculate everything that I should do in every situation, but there's a bunch of rules of thumb that I've developed. Okay, if I get a bunch of money, all of a sudden, I should share it with other individuals. Sharing is caring. Right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You learn these things through a variety of different avenues in terms of this. In fact, that's the importance of the more formal civil society that most people think about, those formal organizations, clubs, and religious groups. Because in order to get these values out, to inform people about these norms, and especially young kids, right? We oftentimes, the political economists, forget about socialization of young children. We think it's children as just basic inputs, like we're sending them to the coal mines to work, right? They've got cost and benefit, all this. No, children are actually the living constitution upon which we write our governing rules in civil society. We teach them from a young age. Sharing is caring. Be nice to other individuals. Right? If you benefit from a fortune, don't brag about it. Be nice, be benevolent with that fortune. Because it helps work out a lot of things. It solves public goods problems. It mitigates problems with people not caring about imposing costs on other people, negative externalities. Don't do that. Before you take an action, it's going to hurt somebody else. If it does, don't do that. We hear that stuff constantly growing up. And organizations, religious organizations, tell us about this all the time. back every major religious institution or religious faith tradition, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, has a basic golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Great governing rule. If everybody followed that, things would be a lot better. And we don't always, though, because sometimes we cheat, and we are still partially rational, self-interested actors. That's why we don't always see the 50-50 in that divide the dollar game. We tend to see 75-25, 70-30, something like that, in terms of that. All right, and that's kind of where culture kind of comes in its form here. Let me give you an example of this, tipping. We talked about this yesterday at the another talk that I gave to the Bastiat Society. Here's a big puzzle. This bothers economists, especially the rational utility economists, right? The thinly rational utilities. Why would anybody tip at a restaurant they know they're never going to come back to? This is one of my favorite restaurants in Washington, Mountain View Diner. It sits on Highway 2 and it gets a lot of transient traffic. Right? People come and go, they're going up to the mountains. They come there once, they never come back again. Why would anybody leave a tip there? Because when you leave a tip, you're oftentimes, oh yeah, that person was a really good tipper, you know, and they rewarded me for really good service. And so, you know, next time they pass by, I'm gonna treat them really well. I used to work in the pizza delivery business, you know, the pizza industrial complex, right? And I can tell you, if you tipped your pizza delivery driver well, your pizza got to you faster. And they would oftentimes put extra cheese and other stuff like that on it. So, you know, why would people do this kind of thing? It's really kind of odd ritual here. It doesn't make sense from an economist's perspective. A purely rational actor would not do this, but we do it all the time. And we return wallets that are lost on the street. People have done these experiments. You know, you have a wallet with like, you know, $500 of cash and a little address card in it and stuff like this. Was somebody going to actually return this thing? I don't know. Actually, people do, more often than not. More often than you would expect. And we know these examples like this. You're really surprised by people. They're doing it because we've been told to do this. We've been socialized. And basically that allows us to trust other individuals. Let me give you another example that I've written on as well too. This is gifting. Now, there was an economist back in 1993, Joel Waldfogel, wrote an article called The Deadweight Loss of Christmas. Bah humbug, right? He says Christmas gift giving is really wasteful in society. Because how many people have ever gotten a gift that you got and you're just like, oh God, I wish I hadn't gotten that ugly sweater, right? And it's got to sit in there and I got to wear it next time at the Christmas party so my aunt doesn't get mad at me or something. You would rather have the cash. So Professor Waldfogel went and did this and he found out that people, actually the Christmas gifts they got were worth less than what the actual price of it was. And he says that's the deadweight loss here. People would have been much better if we just gave each other cash. So Christmas gift giving is horrible. Not to mention the wrapping paper and the cards and the bows and all that stuff. What a waste. He even parlayed this into a book called Scroogeonomics, which, by the way, is a really delightful book. It's a really fun book. I like Professor Waldfogel. We've interacted on this kind of thing. And I always thought he wrote that article in jest to make fun of people who are like, just grab onto that thinly utility maximizing individual model. But he actually was kind of serious on it. I was almost surprised, like, oh, you must not be fun at parties. But you did write a delightful book. So there's Scrooge right there. But I have to remind you, because the Scrooge story, this is the one that everybody thinks about economists. The first few pages, Scrooge is there sitting there counting his money in the house. And then, you know, poor little Bob Cratchit, his employer asks, can I have a little bit more coal? He's, ah. And somebody asks for a charity when they come to his door. He's, why would I give charity? But you have to read to the end. So if somebody called me a Scrooge and they wanted to insult me because I'm too selfish and things like this, I would remind them that basically by the end of the story, Scrooge learns all about graciousness. Right? He visits, you know, several ghosts visit him. The Ghost of Christmas Present is the one I'm actually most fascinated with. There's this abundance. And look at how people are sharing it. They're giving each other gifts and they're having fun. They're smiling all the time. You're sitting home alone. What kind of life do you have? And at the very end of A Christmas Carol, Scrooge buys the biggest turkey he can find to send to Bob Cratchit, and you know what he does with the delivery boy? He tips him. He gives a tip to the delivery boy. Because Scrooge learned how to be a better person and a better business person by showing he's willing to sacrifice and build relations before any transactions. Because I don't want to get in a transaction with you as a business person if something goes wrong and you're just going to run and take the money and not try to expend resources, you know, sacrificially to deal with that kind of thing. Right? I I don't want that. I want a good relationship. If something goes sour in our business relationship, we wrote up a contract, it's like, oh my God, I want to know that you're willing to spend some more resources to make that thing right. Because if I feel assured about that, I'm going to engage with you. We're going to have a transaction. So we have to build a trusting relationship before that. Gifting does this. Gifting builds trust within society. And Michael Thomas and I wrote, I think, one of my favorite articles, right? How gifting creates dynamic efficiency in the economy by creating relations before transactions. And you can download this at my website, anthonygill.org, and you can see I'm 2005 Time Person Magazine of the Year, all that kind of stuff, which is really cool. But this is really important. And we oftentimes overlook it and what's going on in that simple ultimatum game or the divide the dollars game. Give you another example here too, that's another one of my favorites. Normally I wear a cowboy hat, but it's so damn humid in here, I'll be dripping sweat. For those of you who were in class, yesterday you were probably watching, look, did you see all the sweats expanding on Professor Gill's shirt? I felt really self-conscious about that. But then again, I'm never going to see you again, so I don't care. Here's the real classic. I love the West, right? I really love the West. And a book by Terry Anderson and P.J. Hill, talked about the wild, wild West. They say, but hold it, it wasn't that wild and wild, right? It actually was very peaceful. And it's a situation that's really interesting because out in the West, in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, there was no formal government. These were all territories and things like this, and so people had to get along. But there was a lot of governance. My favorite chapter in there is about mining, and this is a picture in the Dakotas of a mine thing. It's about 1880, 1885, so where the picture was taken. And what would happen? You would think people are mining for gold, so they would kill each other to get that gold. They rarely ever did that. Okay? What they did instead was they created informal rules. Everybody gets a claim. First come, first serve. You pick your claim. It can only be about 5 square acres, and you have to work that claim on a regular basis. And I thought it'd be like 4 or 5 days out of the week or something like that. And people would just be neighborly, walk by and say, hey, are you working your claim? And things like this. And word gets around through gossip. Gossip, by the way, is a very useful tool for enforcing these social norms. And people got along really well. There was governance without government. They created their own civil society because they realized that if we start stealing each other's stuff and shooting all the time, it's going to be a bloody mess, and it's not going to be good. So let's create some basic rules of thumb. Let's all agree to these kind of things. And it happens spontaneously, without government. To me, that's beautiful. Relations were established before transactions. That's what civil society here is all about. And so kind of to conclude and wrap all this stuff up here, let's talk a little bit about this chart that I put here before. Your economics on one side, your politics on the other, that makes political economists, but all this stuff that goes on in the middle. The formal civil organizations, the informal societies that are created in mining camps, okay, or that are created, through, your friends groups and, people that you meet and all those kind of things. Civil society is this arena that allows for this kind of self-government. And it allows us to kind of understand and tailor different solutions and conditions, including punishment for violating norms, based upon our local knowledge. Oh, that person was kind of stealing from other person. Yeah, but he's been having a hard go of things. Okay, we're going to kind of lay off on him this time. Let's just give him a warning. We'll all kind of, go there to back him up and stuff like this. But I can tell you this. We had a guy, his name was Standing Bill. And we called him Standing Bill because his name was Bill, and he always stood at the bar instead of sat. And one time people realized he was not ordering as much, and he wasn't tipping very much. And you're supposed to tip well at our bar, especially if you're a regular. What's going on? But he lost his job at Boeing. You're like, oh, and he still wants to kind of be within our group and stuff like that. So we covered his bill for him. We adjusted because we knew the circumstances. We knew Bill pretty well. And it's not that he was a bad guy trying to stiff the throat. He's just going through a hard time. And this was the governance. This was, solving different social problems without relying on the government. You could just said, take it out of your unemployment check, buddy, or, no. We kind of rallied around it because we had this relationship before, any kind of transactions actually occurred. And that is really beautiful here. And more importantly, it's this buffer between individuals and the coercive state. Because governments can be coercive, right? They're going to enforce laws, and they might enforce laws in ways that you don't really like. And they have the power to do that, and it's really hard to tell the police that they can't be police because they're the ones that have the policing authority. And so here you have this kind of self-policing mechanism amongst informal groups. That's governance. That's civil society working, and that is so beautiful. Because you can custom tailor solutions to the problems based upon what you know. It solves that whole problem of, do we know that Washington DC knows everything about us over here is gonna make the right policy? No, let's make it in our smaller communities here. On top of that, we don't know where these social norms come from. They kind of remain murky. There's a tipping, in fact, I've kind of looked into this. The best history we have is kind of in Britain somewhere in the 16th century. But it's because they evolve spontaneously. We're not looking for them at the outset, but all of a sudden they're there, right? But what's more important for this is that in order for these norms and social values to evolve and come about, there needs to be some degree of tolerance in society, which is a very, very important fundamental norm. And there has to be the freedom to do that. So the promotion of freedom and tolerance is really what makes civil society work, to change according to conditions, to morph into different things. Sometimes it goes down bad paths. Sometimes there are bad civil society and bad cultures that come about. But you have to basically allow the freedom for things to change over time. The other problem that we have here, and I'm always nervous about these formal social groups, is that they can always be enticed, or can often be enticed by the state, because the government does have coercive power. And I've seen this in religion all the time. Churches have a hard time raising funds, so they go to the state and ask the state to subsidize them. In the United States, you don't see that a whole lot, although it's happened. But throughout the world, that's where you get church and state cooperating with one another. That's not really good, because these groups that are supposed to be functioning to build this informal social society now become part of the coercive apparatus. And that's dangerous as well, too. Resist that kind of temptation that you have here. Civil society is basically what makes us human. It's what puts the human within humanomics. And it's really what makes our lives more interesting, colorful, and vibrant. Notice how I have, in black and white here. That's the economics, the basic Econ 101, rational utility maximizers, although they're a little bit thicker here in government. In between is us figuring out how to face-to-face govern amongst ourselves and building relationships before we build transactions. It's beautiful. For me, that's really wonderful. And I love seeing that all the time. And so I want to tell you right now is to reject bad social science, which either tells you, okay, markets fail, go right away to government. I want you to stop and pause, and I want you to think for a moment, could civil society actually solve these problems? To look at the system in a whole more complete way. And be amazed by it, because so much of what goes on in the university today is we tell you about solving problems. Crisis after